The whip cracked across Willow Foster's back for the third time, and she bit down so hard on the leather strap between her teeth that she tasted blood mixing with the dust of Rawhide, Nevada's Main Street. It was August 1878, and the scorching sun beat down mercilessly as half the town gathered to watch her punishment, their faces a mixture of righteous satisfaction and uncomfortable pity. She had known the consequences when she slipped the key to Maria Gonzalez's cell, had known what would happen when she helped the young Mexican woman flee before dawn, but she would do it again in a heartbeat. Maria's only crime had been stealing bread to feed her starving children, and Sheriff Dalton's idea of justice was 3 months of hard labor that would have killed her within weeks. The fourth lash came, and Willow's knees buckled. Strong hands caught her before she could fall completely, holding her upright against the post. Through the haze of pain, she heard Sheriff Dalton's voice booming across the crowd, declaring her a criminal sympathizer, a threat to law and order. The irony would have made her laugh if she could have drawn breath. She was the daughter of the town's late doctor, a woman who had spent 23 years learning healing and compassion at her father's side before consumption took him last winter. Helping people was not just what she did, it was who she was. When the 10th and final lash fell, Willow slumped against the ropes binding her wrists to the whipping post. The sheriff cut her down without ceremony, and she collapsed into the dirt, her torn dress soaking with blood. The crowd began to disperse, their entertainment concluded, returning to their shops and homes as though they had not just watched a woman be brutally punished for an act of mercy. Willow lay there, cheek pressed against the sun-baked earth, and wondered if she had the strength to crawl to her small house at the edge of town. "Move along now, show's over," Sheriff Dalton barked, his boots inches from her face. "And let this be a lesson to anyone else thinking of interfering with the law in this town." Willow closed her eyes, gathering what remained of her strength. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her broken. She would stand, she would walk home, she would survive this. She had to, because Maria needed to make it across the border and Willow needed to know her sacrifice had meant something. "I will help you up, miss." The voice was unfamiliar, low and rough but somehow gentle. Strong hands slid carefully under her arms, avoiding her ravaged back as much as possible. "Easy now, take your time. Leave her," Dalton snapped. "She made her choice, and I am making mine." The stranger's voice held steel beneath its softness. "Step aside, Sheriff." Willow forced her eyes open and found herself looking up into the face of a man she had never seen before. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of a summer storm, gray with hints of blue. Dust covered his worn clothes, and a gun belt sat low on his hips, marking him as someone comfortable with violence if needed. But his hands were careful as they lifted her, his face tight with controlled anger at her condition. "I said leave her," Dalton repeated, his hand moving to his own weapon. The stranger looked at the sheriff with an expression that made even Willow's pain-fogged mind register danger. "And I said no. Now, you can draw that gun if you want, but we both know how that will end. This woman needs medical attention, and I am taking her to get it. Unless you want to explain to the territorial marshal why you prevented aid to someone you just had whipped near to death." The two men stared at each other for a long moment, tension crackling between them like heat lightning. Finally, Dalton stepped back, his face flushed with fury. "She got what she deserved, Quincy, and you would do well to remember that interfering with the law has consequences." "So I see," the stranger said quietly, his eyes flicking to Willow's back. "So I see." He lifted her as carefully as though she were made of glass, cradling her against his chest in a way that put no pressure on her wounds. Willow wanted to protest, to insist she could walk, but the world was spinning and the pain was overwhelming. She let her head rest against his shoulder and tried not to pass out. "Where are we going?" she managed to whisper as he carried her down the street. "Somewhere safe," he replied. "Somewhere I can tend those wounds properly. I am Everett Quincy and you are going to be all right, miss. I promise you that." Willow had no reason to trust this stranger, but something in his voice made her believe him anyway. She closed her eyes and let the darkness take her. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. Coolness against her burning skin. The smell of herbs and clean linen. Gentle hands applying something to her back that stung for a moment before bringing blessed relief. A deep voice murmuring words she could not quite make out. She drifted in and out, aware of time passing but unable to measure it, until finally she surfaced completely to find herself lying face down on a bed in a room she did not recognize. "Easy," Everett's voice said from nearby. "Do not try to sit up yet. Your back needs more time to heal." Willow turned her head carefully and found him sitting in a chair beside the bed, a bowl of water and clean cloths on the table next to him. He had removed his hat and gun belt, and in the lamplight she could see he was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 27 or 28. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but there were laugh lines around his eyes that suggested a life not entirely defined by hardship. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice rough. "My room at the boarding house. Mrs. Chen was kind enough to let me bring you here and has been helping me care for you. You have been unconscious for most of a day." He wrung out one of the cloths and moved closer. "I need to clean the wounds again and apply more salve. It will hurt, but infection is the real danger now." Willow nodded, bracing herself. The pain when he began was considerable, but she had endured worse the day before. She focused on breathing, on the surprising gentleness of his touch, on anything but the fire across her back. "Why?" she asked when she could speak again. "Why are you helping me?" "You do not know me." Everett was silent for a moment, his hands steady as he worked. "Because someone needed to," he said finally. "Because I rode into town yesterday evening and heard the whole story from Mrs. Chen. About Maria Gonzalez, about you giving her the key and a horse, about how Sheriff Dalton caught you and decided to make an example. Because watching a woman be whipped for showing mercy turns my stomach, and I could not stand by and do nothing." "That is not an answer," Willow said softly. "No," he agreed. "I suppose it is not." He finished applying the salve and began bandaging her back with clean strips of cloth, his movements practiced and sure. "The real answer is that I have seen too much cruelty in this world, Miss Foster. I spent 5 years as a lawman in Colorado before I resigned because I could not stomach what passed for justice anymore. Men hanged for stealing horses while wealthy ranchers got away with murder. Women and children turned out of their homes while thieves in expensive suits robbed entire towns blind. I came to Nevada looking for something different, something better. Instead, I found more of the same." His hand stilled for a moment, resting lightly on her shoulders. "But then I saw you. Saw what you did, knowing full well what it would cost. Saw you take those lashes without crying out, without begging for mercy. And I thought, there is at least one person in this God-forsaken town who understands what justice really means. So yes, I am helping you. Because you did the right thing, Miss Foster, regardless of what that corrupt excuse for a sheriff says. You did the right thing." Tears burned in Willow's eyes, though whether from pain or emotion she could not say. No one had said those words to her, not since her father died. The town had turned on her with frightening speed, condemning her for interfering with the law, for thinking she knew better than the sheriff. Even people she had helped, people she had nursed through illness and injury, had watched her punishment without protest. "Maria," she whispered. "Did she make it? Did she get away?" Mrs. Chen sent word to some friends. "Maria made it across the border into California 2 days ago. She and her children are safe with family in Sacramento." The relief was so intense it made Willow dizzy. "Good. That is good. It is better than good. It is what should have happened in the first place." Everett finished the bandaging and pulled a light sheet over her, careful not to let it touch her wounds. "Now you need to rest. I will be right here if you need anything." "You do not have to stay," Willow protested weakly. "I know I do not have to, but I am going to anyway." He settled back into his chair, his storm-gray eyes serious. "Sleep, Miss Foster. You are safe here." Willow wanted to argue, to insist she could take care of herself, but exhaustion pulled at her like a riptide. She let her eyes drift closed and, for the first time in what felt like forever, allowed herself to feel safe. Over the next week, a routine developed. Everett tended her wounds morning and evening, his touch growing more confident as the injuries began to heal. Mrs. Chen brought food and fresh water, her weathered face kind despite the risk she took in harboring Willow. The boarding house owner had come from China 20 years ago and knew what it meant to be on the wrong side of injustice. She brought broths and teas, pressed healing herbs into Everett's hands, and asked no payment for her kindness. During the long hours between treatments, Everett and Willow talked. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about joining the army at 18, and serving as a scout in the Indian campaigns, before realizing he was on the wrong side of that war too. About meeting his mentor, an old marshal named Tom Brennan, who taught him that the law was meant to protect people, not punish them for being poor or different. About the day he turned in his badge and rode away, looking for a place where he could make a difference. Willow told him about her father, about learning medicine at his side from the time she was old enough to hold a bandage, about her mother dying in childbirth when Willow was 7, leaving her and her father to navigate the world together, about inheriting his small practice and his smaller savings, about trying to continue his work in a town that believed women had no business practicing medicine, about Maria Gonzalez showing up at her door in the middle of the night, terrified and desperate, and Willow knowing she could not turn away. "I did not even think about the consequences," she admitted, as Everett changed her bandages 5 days after the whipping. The wounds were healing well, angry red lines instead of open gashes, and the pain had faded to a constant ache rather than sharp agony. "I just knew that leaving her in that cell would be the same as killing her. The conditions were horrible, Everett. No food, barely any water, and Dalton's deputy taking liberties whenever he felt like it. I could not stand by and do nothing." "So you did not," Everett said simply. He secured the last bandage and helped her sit up carefully, supporting her with an arm around her waist. It was the first time she had been upright in days, and the room spun for a moment before steadying. "That takes courage, Willow. Real courage, not the kind that comes from carrying a gun." It was the first time he had used her given name, and she found she liked the sound of it in his rough voice. "Or foolishness," she said with a weak smile. "I am not sure there is much difference. There is a world of difference." He studied her face, his expression serious. "Courage is knowing the cost and doing what is right anyway. Foolishness is not understanding the danger. You knew exactly what would happen, and you did it anyway. That is the definition of courage in my book." Willow met his eyes and felt something shift between them, something she could not quite name, but that made her breath catch. They were sitting close together on the narrow bed, his arm still around her waist, and she was suddenly very aware of the warmth of him, the solid strength, the way he looked at her as though she was someone worth protecting. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." for standing up to Dalton, for caring for me, for believing I did the right thing. It means more than you know." "You do not need to thank me," Everett replied, but his voice was rougher than usual. "I did what anyone should have done, but you were the only one who did." Willow lifted her hand, hesitated, then placed it over his where it rested on the bed. "That matters, Everett. It matters to me." He looked down at their joined hands, then back up at her face, and Willow saw something kindle in his storm-gray eyes that made her heart beat faster. For a moment she thought he might lean in, might close the small distance between them, and she found herself wanting him to with an intensity that surprised her. But then footsteps sounded in the hallway, and Everett pulled back, clearing his throat. "You should try to eat something," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Mrs. Chen made soup." The moment passed, but Willow could still feel the echo of it, the promise of something more. She nodded and let him help her settle against the pillows, accepting the bowl of soup with hands that trembled slightly. As she ate, she watched him move around the small room, putting away the medical supplies, and wondered what it meant that she felt safer with this stranger than she had with anyone since her father died. By the end of the second week, Willow was able to walk short distances and dress herself, though her back still pained her if she moved too quickly. Everett had taken a job at the livery stable to pay for their room and board, mucking out stalls and tending horses with the same quiet competence he brought to everything. He came back each evening smelling of hay and leather, and Willow found herself looking forward to those moments more than she wanted to admit. They fell into a new routine, eating dinner together in the room while Everett told her about the horses he had worked with that day or the people he had met around town. Willow listened and laughed and felt something loosening in her chest, some tight knot of loneliness she had been carrying for so long she had forgotten it was there. "The town is divided about you," Everett told her one evening as they shared a meal of beans and cornbread. "Half think Dalton was right to punish you, that you broke the law and deserved what you got. But the other half are starting to whisper that maybe the law was wrong in the first place. Mrs. Rodriguez came by the stable today and asked me to give you this." He pulled a small cloth bag from his pocket and handed it to Willow. Inside were coins, more money than Mrs. Rodriguez could spare, and a note that simply said, "Thank you for Maria." Willow felt tears sting her eyes. "I did not know anyone else felt that way. Everyone just watched. No one tried to stop it." "Fear is a powerful thing," Everett said quietly. "Dalton rules this town through intimidation, and people are afraid of ending up where you did, tied to that post. But you showed them it is possible to stand up, to do what is right even when it costs you everything. That kind of courage is contagious, Willow. Give it time." She looked at him across the small table, this man who had walked into her life at her darkest moment and brought light with him. "What about you?" she asked. "When will you move on? You said you were just passing through Rawhide, that you were looking for something better. This cannot be it." Everett set down his fork and met her eyes. "I am not in any hurry to leave," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her pulse quicken. "Not anymore." "Why not?" The question came out barely above a whisper. He reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "Because I found what I was looking for," he said simply. "And I am not ready to walk away from it yet." Willow's breath caught. She knew she should pull her hand away, should remind herself that she barely knew this man, that she had no business feeling this way about someone she had met less than 3 weeks ago. But she did not pull away. Instead, she tightened her fingers around his and let herself hope for the first time in a very long time. "Stay then," she said. "Stay as long as you want." "I might want to stay a very long time," Everett warned, but his eyes were gentle, almost uncertain. "I might want to stay permanently if you will have me." I think I would like that, Willow admitted, her heart hammering in her chest. I think I would like that very much. Everett stood and moved around the table, then knelt beside her chair so they were at eye level. I know this is fast, he said, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. I know we have not known each other long, but Willow, I have never met anyone like you. Your courage, your compassion, your absolute refusal to compromise on what you know is right, it humbles me. Makes me want to be a better man. Makes me want to stay and fight for the kind of justice we both believe in, together if you will let me. Willow reached up with her free hand and cupped his cheek, feeling the rasp of stubble against her palm. I want that, she said. I want you to stay. I want us to fight together. And Everett, I want you. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but Willow did not want to pull away. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted the promise of something good and true after so much darkness. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and careful, mindful of her healing back, but there was heat beneath the gentleness that made her blood sing. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Everett rested his forehead against hers. I am going to court you properly, he said. Take you to dinner, walk with you in the evening, give you all the time you need to be sure about this, about us. I am already sure, Willow said, but she smiled. But I will let you court me anyway because I think I would like to see what that looks like. It looks like me making sure everyone in this town knows you are under my protection, Everett said, his voice taking on an edge. Starting with Sheriff Dalton. Willow's smile faded. Everett, be careful. He is dangerous and he has the law on his side, corrupt as it is. So did I once, Everett replied. The difference is, I learned when to walk away from a broken system. Dalton needs to learn that lesson too before he hurts anyone else. Over the following weeks, Everett made good on his promise to court Willow properly. As her back healed enough for her to move freely again, he took her walking through the scrubland surrounding Rawhide, pointing out plants and birds, telling her stories about his travels. He brought her wildflowers that survived in the harsh Nevada soil, their bright blooms defiant against the dust. He sat with her on Mrs. Chen's porch in the evenings, close enough that their shoulders touched, and talked about everything and nothing until the stars came out. Willow found herself falling deeper with each passing day. Everett's strength was not the loud, aggressive kind that Dalton displayed. It was quiet and steady, the strength of someone who knew who he was and what he stood for. He listened when she talked about her work, her dreams of reopening her father's practice, her frustration with a town that saw her as property rather than a person with skills and knowledge. He did not try to fix everything or tell her she was wrong to feel angry. He just listened and understood and believed in her. I want to try practicing medicine again, she told him one evening as they sat watching the sun set over the distant mountains. I know the town turned on me, but there are still people who need help. People Dalton has pushed to the edges, people no one else will treat. I could help them. Then you should, Everett said immediately. You have a gift, Willow, and a calling. Do not let fear or Dalton's corruption steal that from you. What if no one comes? What if they are too afraid? Then we start small. We help the people we can reach and we build from there. He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. You are not alone in this anymore, Willow. Whatever you decide to do, wherever you decide to go, I am with you. For as long as you will have me. Willow turned to look at him, this man who had become so essential to her in such a short time. The setting sun turned his dark hair bronze and made his eyes look almost silver. What if I want you forever? She asked, her heart in her throat. Everett's expression softened, and he lifted their joined hands to press a kiss to her knuckles. Then forever is what you will get, he said. Because Willow Foster, I am completely and irrevocably in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, precious and perfect. Willow felt tears prick her eyes, but these were tears of joy, not pain. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have loved you since you carried me away from that post and told me I did the right thing. Since you looked at me like I was someone worth saving." "You are worth saving," Everett said fiercely. "You are worth everything, Willow, and I will spend the rest of my life proving that to you if you will let me." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold band. "This was my grandmother's," he said. "The only thing of value I own. I know we have not known each other long by conventional standards, but I also know I do not want to spend another day without you in my life. Willow Foster, will you marry me?" Willow looked at the ring, then at Everett's face and saw her entire future written there. A future of fighting for justice together, of building a practice that served those who needed it most, of finding home not in a place but in a person. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Everett Quincy, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her carefully into his arms, mindful of her still healing back. They stayed like that as the sun disappeared and the first stars appeared, holding each other and making promises about the life they would build together. They married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at Mrs. Chen's boarding house, with only a handful of guests in attendance. Mrs. Chen served as witness, along with Mr. Rodriguez and a few other families who had benefited from Willow's medical skills over the years. It was not the grand wedding Willow's father might have imagined for her, but it was perfect in its simplicity, a declaration of love and commitment that needed no elaborate trappings. Sheriff Dalton made his displeasure known by riding past the boarding house several times during the ceremony, his presence a clear threat. But Everett stood tall and unbothered, his hand steady in Willow's as they spoke their vows, and when Dalton finally rode away, it felt like a victory. After the wedding, Everett moved Willow's belongings from the small house at the edge of town to a better location near the center, a building that had once been a dry goods store but stood empty now. With money pooled from their savings and contributions from the families they had helped, they began transforming it into a proper medical clinic. Everett built examination tables and cabinets for supplies, while Willow sorted through her father's old instruments and books, organizing everything with care. The day they hung the sign reading Foster Quincy Medical Practice above the door, a small crowd gathered to watch. Some faces were hostile, but others showed cautious hope. Willow looked at those hopeful faces and knew they were building something important, something that would outlast Dalton's reign of corruption. Their first patient was Mrs. Rodriguez's youngest son, who had fallen and broken his arm. Willow set the bone with practiced efficiency while Everett kept the boy calm and distracted with stories. When they finished and Mrs. Rodriguez tried to pay them with the last of her coins, Willow refused. "You already paid me," she said, pressing the coins back into the woman's hand. "When you sent me money while I was recovering. This is what neighbors do for each other. We help." Word spread quickly. Within a month, the clinic was seeing patients daily, people who had been ignored or mistreated by the town's other doctor, who charged exorbitant fees and refused to treat anyone who could not pay in advance. Willow treated fevers and set bones and delivered babies, while Everett managed the business side and provided security, his presence ensuring that Dalton's deputies thought twice before causing trouble. Not everyone was happy about their success. Dalton himself appeared at the clinic one afternoon, his face red with anger. "You are stealing patients from Dr. Harrison," he accused, jabbing a finger at Willow. "He has complained to me about your unlicensed practice." "I have my father's medical texts and 5 years of apprenticeship," Willow replied calmly, though her heart raced. More training than Harrison ever had, and I am not stealing anyone. People come here because we treat them with respect and do not charge them their life savings for basic care. You are a criminal, Dalton snarled, and a woman has no business practicing medicine. Everett stepped forward, placing himself between Dalton and Willow. And a corrupt sheriff has no business deciding who can and cannot help their neighbors, he said quietly. Willow is providing a service this town desperately needs. If you have a legal complaint, take it to the territorial marshal. Otherwise, get out of our clinic. Dalton's hand moved to his gun, but Everett did not flinch. The two men stared at each other for a long, tense moment before Dalton finally stepped back. "This is not over," he warned. "You made an enemy of the law in this town, and that never ends well." "The law should serve the people, not terrorize them," Everett replied. "When you remember that, we can talk. Until then, stay out of our way." After Dalton left, Willow sagged against the examination table, her hands shaking with delayed reaction. Everett pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "He is going to keep coming after us," she whispered. "He will not stop until he finds a way to shut us down or worse." "Then we will deal with it together," Everett said firmly. "We have right on our side, Willow. That has to count for something." It counted for more than either of them expected. 2 weeks after Dalton's visit, a man rode into town wearing a marshal's badge. His name was James Holland, and he had come to investigate reports of corruption in Rawhide's sheriff's department. Apparently, Maria Gonzalez had not fled to California and stayed silent. She had told her story to authorities there, and they had passed it along to the territorial marshal's office. Holland interviewed everyone in town, from the wealthy ranchers to the poorest families living on the outskirts. He examined the jail where Maria had been held and spoke at length with Willow and Everett about what they had witnessed. His face grew increasingly grim as the evidence mounted, until finally he called a town meeting to announce his findings. Sheriff William Dalton has been relieved of his duties pending a full investigation into charges of corruption, excessive force, and abuse of power, Holland announced from the steps of the town hall. Deputy Samuel Price has been arrested for assault. New elections for sheriff will be held within 60 days, and in the meantime, I will be appointing a temporary replacement to maintain order. The crowd erupted into chaos, some people cheering, others shouting in protest. Dalton himself stood at the back, his face purple with rage, but Holland's men surrounded him before he could cause trouble. As they led him away, Dalton caught Everett's eye and mouthed a threat, but Everett just shook his head and turned away, pulling Willow close. "It is over," she whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "The corruption is over," Everett agreed, "but our work is just beginning." He was right. With Dalton gone, the town slowly began to change. The families who had been too afraid to speak up before started coming forward with their own stories of abuse and intimidation. The clinic saw more patients as people realized they could seek help without fear of reprisal. And when elections were held 2 months later, the town chose a new sheriff, a fair-minded rancher named Thomas Blackwell who had no patience for corruption or cruelty. Marshal Holland stopped by the clinic before he left town, his weathered face showing approval. "You two did a good thing here," he told Willow and Everett. "Not many people would have stood up to Dalton the way you did. This town is better for your courage." "We just did what was right," Willow said, but she felt a warm glow of pride at his words. "That is exactly what I mean," Holland replied. "The world needs more people willing to do what is right. Consequences be damned." He tipped his hat to them and rode away, leaving Willow and Everett standing together in the doorway of their clinic, watching him go. Life settled into a new rhythm after that. The clinic thrived, becoming the heart of the community. Willow's reputation as a healer grew, and people came from miles around seeking her care. Everett continued to help at the clinic, but also took on work as a mediator, helping resolve disputes between neighbors and ranchers without resorting to violence. Together, they became pillars of the community, respected and trusted. A year after their wedding, Willow discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She had helped deliver dozens of babies, but had never imagined herself as a mother. Everett, however, was nothing but delighted, his gray eyes shining with happiness as he placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a family," he said wonderingly. "An actual family. Are you ready for that?" Willow asked, voicing her own fears. "For the sleepless nights and the constant worry, I am ready for anything as long as I have you," Everett replied, pulling her close. "We will figure it out together, just like we have figured out everything else." The pregnancy was difficult. Willow struggled with severe morning sickness that lasted well into her second trimester, and the summer heat of Nevada made everything worse. But Everett was endlessly patient, caring for her with the same gentle competence he had shown when treating her wounds after the whipping. He took over more of the clinic's work, brought her cool water and light meals, and sat with her during the long nights when sleep would not come. "I am supposed to be the doctor," Willow grumbled one evening as Everett massaged her aching feet. "I should be taking care of patients, not lying here like an invalid." "You are growing our child," Everett said firmly. "That is more important than anything else right now." The patients understand, and Mrs. Chen has been wonderful about helping with the simpler cases. "Just focus on staying healthy, Willow. That is all I ask." Their son was born in March of 1880, during a late-season snowstorm that blanketed Rawhide in unexpected white. The labor was long and painful, and there were moments when Willow feared she would not survive it. But Everett never left her side, holding her hand and whispering encouragement, and Mrs. Chen assisted with the practiced skill of someone who had delivered many babies in her time. When their son finally entered the world, squalling and red-faced, Willow felt a surge of love so intense it left her breathless. Everett cut the cord with shaking hands, then carefully lifted the baby and placed him on Willow's chest, his own eyes wet with tears. "He is perfect," Everett whispered. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Daniel Thomas Quincy after Willow's father and the new sheriff who had helped restore order to Rawhide. Daniel was a fussy baby who demanded constant attention, but Willow and Everett adapted to parenthood with the same determination they brought to everything else. They took turns walking him when he cried at night, passed him back and forth during clinic hours, and marveled at every tiny milestone. As Daniel grew, the clinic continued to expand. They hired a young woman named Sarah Martinez to help with administrative work, and Everett began training as Willow's official medical assistant, learning to suture wounds and set bones under her guidance. Together, they treated everyone who came through their doors, regardless of ability to pay, and the community responded with fierce loyalty. When Daniel was 2 years old, Willow found herself pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, or perhaps because her body had adjusted. Their daughter, Emma Rose Quincy, arrived in the autumn of 1882, a calm, easy baby who seemed content to simply observe the world around her. "2 children," Everett said one evening as they sat on their porch, watching Daniel chase fireflies while Emma slept in Willow's arms. "A thriving practice, a community that trusts us, and a life built on doing what is right. Not bad for a disgraced lawman and a woman who was whipped in the town square." Willow leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady presence that had become her anchor. "We came so far from that day," she said softly. "Sometimes I can barely remember the pain, the fear. All I remember is you telling me I did the right thing, believing in me when no one else did." "You made it easy to believe," Everett replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You are the bravest person I have ever met, Willow. The most compassionate, the most stubborn, the most absolutely infuriating when you decide you know best." He smiled to take the sting from his words. "And I would not change a single thing about you. Not even the stubbornness," Willow teased. "Especially not the stubbornness. That is what saved Maria. That is what built this clinic. That is what will teach our children to stand up for what is right, even when it costs them." Everett took her hand, his thumb tracing over the scar on her wrist from the ropes that had bound her to the whipping post. "These scars tell a story, Willow. A story about courage and sacrifice and love. I am proud to be part of that story with you." Willow felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. She looked at her husband, her children, her life, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. They had built something beautiful from pain and injustice, something that would endure long after they were gone. Years passed in the way they do, quickly and slowly at the same time. Daniel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and showed early interest in medicine. Emma was more adventurous, always exploring and asking questions about everything. Willow taught them both to read using her father's medical texts, while Everett taught them to ride and shoot and think critically about justice and fairness. The clinic became an institution in Rawhide, a place where anyone could find help regardless of their circumstances. Willow trained several other women in basic medical care, creating a network of healers throughout the territory. Everett served as an unofficial advisor to Sheriff Blackwell, helping navigate complex situations with the wisdom he had gained from years of experience on both sides of the law. When Daniel was 10 and Emma 8, a young Mexican woman showed up at their door one evening, travel-worn and nervous. It took Willow a moment to recognize her, but then realization dawned. "Maria, Senora Quincy," Maria said, her eyes filling with tears. "I had to come, had to thank you in person for what you did, for the sacrifice you made so my children could live. We are settled now in California. My children are grown and healthy, and it is all because of you." Willow pulled her into a tight embrace, feeling the echo of that long-ago night when she had pressed a key into Maria's hand and pointed her toward freedom. "You do not need to thank me," she said. "I did what anyone should have done." "But you were the only one who did," Maria replied, echoing Willow's words to Everett all those years ago. "You changed my life, Senora, changed my children's lives. I could never repay that debt." "Then do not try," Willow said gently. "Just live well. Live freely. That is all the payment I need." Maria stayed for dinner, telling them about her life in California, her children's accomplishments, the community she had found there. Daniel and Emma listened with wide eyes as their mother's past came alive in Maria's stories, understanding for the first time the full weight of what their parents had endured and overcome. After Maria left the next morning, Daniel approached Willow in the clinic. "Mama," he said seriously, "when I grow up, I want to be like you and Papa. I want to help people even when it is hard, even when it costs something." Willow knelt down to look him in the eye, her heart swelling with pride. "Then you will," she said simply, "because that is what Quincy's do. We stand up for what is right, no matter what." Emma, overhearing, piped up from where she was organizing bandages. "I am going to be a doctor like Mama," she announced, "and I am going to help everyone, even the people other doctors turn away." Everett, watching from the doorway, caught Willow's eye and smiled. They were raising their children right, teaching them the values that mattered. The legacy they were building was not just in the clinic or their reputation, but in the next generation of people who would stand up against injustice. As the years continued to pass, Rawhide transformed from a rough frontier town into a proper community. More families settled there, drawn by the promise of fair treatment and opportunity. The clinic expanded again, eventually becoming a small hospital with several rooms for patients who needed extended care. Willow trained a young doctor fresh from medical school back east, ensuring that the practice would continue even after she could no longer work. Daniel went to medical school himself when he turned 18, following in his mother's footsteps with the same determination she had shown. Emma, true to her childhood declaration, stayed in Rawhide to train under Willow, proving herself to be an even more skilled diagnostician than her mother. Together, they treated the next generation of patients, continuing the tradition of care and compassion. Everett, now in his 50s, finally accepted a position as deputy to Sheriff Blackwell, who was aging and needed help maintaining order. It was a bittersweet decision, putting the badge back on after so many years, but this time it felt different. This time, he was serving a community built on justice and fairness, not corruption and fear. On a warm evening in the summer of 1895, Willow and Everett sat on their porch, watching the sun set over the mountains just as they had done countless times before. They were older now, grayer and slower, but their hands still fit together perfectly, and the love between them had only deepened with time. "You ever regret it?" Everett asked suddenly. "Helping Maria, taking those lashes, everything that came after?" Willow considered the question seriously, thinking about the pain and fear of that day, the long recovery, the battles they had fought. But she also thought about the life they had built, the people they had helped, the family they had raised. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "That moment changed everything, Everett. It brought you into my life. It showed me what I was capable of. It started us on this path." "I am glad," Everett said, squeezing her hand, "because that was the day I found my purpose again, the day I found you. The day I learned that one person standing up for what is right can change the world." "We changed it together," Willow corrected gently. "You stood with me when no one else would. You told me I did the right thing when the whole town said otherwise. You loved me when I was broken and helped me become whole again. We did this together, Everett, all of it." "Together," Everett agreed, pulling her close. "Always together." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out, two people who had found each other in darkness and built a life filled with light. In the distance, they could hear Emma closing up the clinic for the night and Daniel's children playing in the yard. The legacy they had created would endure long after they were gone, a testament to the power of courage and compassion and love. 20 more years passed in a blur of grandchildren and great-grandchildren, of watching the community they had helped build continue to grow and thrive. Willow and Everett grew old together, their bodies failing even as their spirits remained strong. They celebrated 50 years of marriage surrounded by 3 generations of family, all of them carrying forward the values they had fought so hard to instill. When Willow finally passed in her sleep at the age of 72, with Everett holding her hand just as he had held it through every trial and triumph of their life together, the entire town of Rawhide mourned. Her funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives she had touched, whose children she had delivered, whose illnesses she had cured. They spoke of her courage, her compassion, her unwavering commitment to doing what was right regardless of the cost. Everett followed her 6 months later, his heart unable to bear being without his beloved wife. They were buried side by side in the Rawhide cemetery, under a simple headstone that read, "Willow Foster Quincy and Everett Daniel Quincy. They did the right thing. The clinic they had built became a hospital that served the region for generations. Their children and grandchildren continued their work, treating patients with the same care and compassion they had learned from Willow and Everett. And every year on the anniversary of that day in August 1878, when a young woman was whipped for helping someone escape, the community of Rawhide gathered to remember the courage it took to stand up against injustice and the love that blossomed from that moment of darkness. Because in the end, that was the real story. Not the pain or the punishment, but what came after. The cowboy who saw a woman being brutalized and chose to intervene. The doctor who refused to let corruption define her. The love that grew between them, fierce and true and unbreakable. The family they built and the legacy they left behind. A legacy that whispered across the years, reminding everyone who heard it that courage matters, that compassion matters, that standing up for what is right always matters, even when it costs everything, especially when it costs everything. That was the lesson Willow Foster Quincy and Everett Daniel Quincy taught the world. That was the gift they left behind. And in the small town of Rawhide, Nevada, in the hearts of the people whose lives they touched, that lesson lived on forever. Their story became legend, passed down through generations as an example of what two people could accomplish when they refused to accept injustice and chose love instead. Young couples would visit their graves and promise to love each other with the same devotion Willow and Everett had shown. Medical students studied Willow's techniques and innovations, marveling at what she had accomplished despite the obstacles placed in her path. Lawmen read about Everett's approach to justice and tried to emulate his balance of strength and compassion. The simple clinic that had started in an old dry goods store became the Foster Quincy Memorial Hospital, a state-of-the-art facility that served all of northern Nevada. It operated on the principles Willow had established. No one turned away for inability to pay. Every patient treated with dignity and respect, medicine as a calling rather than a business. The hospital's charter, written by Daniel and Emma, began with the words their father had spoken to their mother on that fateful day. "You did the right thing." Those words became a touchstone for the entire community, a reminder that doing what is right matters more than comfort or safety or approval. They were carved above the hospital entrance, printed on medical diplomas, whispered by mothers to children learning right from wrong. They echoed through time, carrying Everett's voice and Willow's courage forward into a future neither of them could have imagined. And on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right across the Nevada desert, people swore they could still feel their presence, those two souls who had loved so fiercely and fought so bravely for justice. They were part of the land now, woven into the fabric of Rawhide itself, a permanent reminder that love can triumph over cruelty, that courage can overcome fear, and that two people standing together against injustice can change the world. The end.